So it's pretty cool to be able to just walk up here. You start to take a couple of things for granted, and all of a sudden you find out, well, yeah, it's pretty nice to be able to walk up here. I know this evening is a little bit odd. We've gathered on a Saturday evening. We turned all the lights out on you, and we put you at tables. Figure it out. Well, this is kind of the format that we want to go with going forward. This is the growth format that we believe that God is leading us to. And what we most want is for you to feel comfortable inviting people to this service. That's the purpose of it being just a little weird when people walk across the lights. We want things to be okay being a little bit weird, because that's what stretches us. Ultimately, that's going to be what you're able to kind of hang on to. So in the vein of being just a little bit weird and a little bit different, this week I was at a conference, and the Flurios were with us and the Olivers were with us. And I just want to tell you my favorite joke from the time that we were there, and we'll see if you appreciate this or not. So imagine that you let Jesus move into your home. And Jesus is always there. Jesus is the person who's always in your home. You come home from a bad day, and Jesus is there to cheer you up. All right, not so bad. And then you come home one day, and you've been dealing with this deep theological issue the whole day, and you walk in the house, and Jesus answers it just like that. You're like, well, I wanted to do a little bit of research on my own and kind of wrestle with that, and Jesus answered it. And then you come home one day, and your dog has died, and Jesus is right there, raises that dog right from the dead, and he's back, good as new, better than ever. And then you come home the next day, and your cat's dead, and there's Jesus with the shovel. Some of you like it, some of you don't. I knew it would be a mixed bag. It's okay. It'll be all right. Sometimes the people that meet in Jesus' name are given a bad rap. We're put into a light where people don't want to be around us, or they're afraid of us, or for whatever reason, we get a bad reputation. And I mean, don't get me wrong, most of the time we really earn it. We go out of our way to be as weird as we possibly can to make sure that the world can't handle us. And that's, for the most part, okay. But we have to be careful on the crazy side of how far we push that boundary. We want people to be able to accept us. The Apostle Paul talked about it. He said, for the people that can't handle me, I soften up. And for the people that can handle it more, I give them all of what I know. He didn't say it exactly that way. I'm paraphrasing, of course. What he actually said was, I've learned to become all things to all people. Meaning that if someone can't handle it, back up and allow them to get the softer version of what we're talking about. And that's okay for a little while. You can only survive so long on just a little bit of what we're talking about. Imagine if I gave you a Bible, and the only thing in that Bible was the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Well, all you know is creation. Well, and that God, it's got to be all right. The God that created. So, well, then where are you in that story? He already did all of his creation. How did you get here? Questions than you have answers. And the same thing is true when we take somebody's information, because I believe that's all you can handle. But the opposite happens when we say, here's everything. everything all at once. Go and figure it out. Now, both of those approaches can be seen as tough. To the person who wants all of it, when they get just a little, it doesn't feel like enough. Now, we easily forget the joy of our salvation. Over a period of time, we begin to walk with the difficulties of life, and we begin to reduce our Christianity all the way down. We get joy, love, mercy, but then when we explain it to someone, we explain rules. Follow these rules and everything will be all right. Do these things and everything will be all right. It's just so narrow. And narrow's all right. I had a good friend of mine who used to say, I'm narrow-minded. And he would hold up his Bible and he'd say, just that narrow. And that's a good thing. But you got to be able to handle the world around you also. We can't just tell people, here's the rules and you have to follow these rules. Jesus explained it this way. Look, there we go. I could see it on that one earlier, but I think that projector's going to die on us. Jesus said this way, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. So, this small gate, this narrow path that leads to life, Jesus explains it as difficult. He describes it as so difficult that many people will miss it. Well, if not for that being Jesus' words, I'd say that's tough teaching and we need softer, gentler words. But Jesus said it, and you can't back away from that. It is what it is. It sits there all by itself. But notice that he doesn't say it's impossible. And he says that it leads to life. This is the last installment of our series on the roads to Jesus. And in this one, we deal with the way of obedience. We don't like that word obedience, right? Most of you would agree? Let me tell you, when Rebecca and I were talking about our wedding, we were talking a long time ago, so she's grown up since then, so we've done some things differently. She asked my grandfather, who was performing the wedding, she said, you can put any words in there you want. You do whatever you want. I will do whatever you want. I don't want the word obey in our vows. And I was like, whatever. You do whatever you want. Well, my grandfather, being an older pastor, when he did the wedding, he said to Rebecca, when we started the vows, he said, repeat after me. And he said, do you promise to love, honor, and obey? And Rebecca, she didn't want to make a fuss right there. I mean, it's our wedding. So she repeated it. Love, honor, obey. And I was like, yeah. And then he turned to me and he says, do you promise to love and honor her as long as you both live? Different vows. Now, I have to really confess that throughout our marriage, I have reminded Rebecca that she did promise in front of God and all of our friends and my grandfather, who I greatly respect and miss, that has gone on to his eternal reward. She promised him to obey. It doesn't work. It never works in any argument. But I like to remind her that she did promise to do that. We don't like that word obey. But if we will submit in obedience, what we're going to find is that it challenges the popular route. It seems that the whole time I was growing up, I kept running into people who asked me, and some of you may have heard this, and you can fill in the gaps as I begin to say it. But many people said to me, if everybody else jumped off a bridge, I suppose you would too. So I took that as a personal challenge as a child. And there was an opportunity in my life where my friends and I, we were going to Treasure Island over in Pinellas County. And if you've been the waterway, and we walked up onto the bridge, and we got to the middle, and right over where all the ships come in, and we just decided and jumped over the edge of the bridge into the water. Now, I'm going to tell you, this was not a smart thing to do. So if you're thinking about doing it, let me tell you, it's a bad idea. Because it wasn't but a minute or so later after we did that there was a boat. You might guess what kind of boat. It was a police boat. And let me tell you, police have no sense of humor when you jump off of the bridge into the intercoastal where the boats go through under the bridge. Well, so not to be outdone by that, we somehow talked our way past the police officer, and we never got in any trouble over that. Later that same day, we found a pier going out into the water. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. I see a couple people shaking their head. This pier doesn't have a border on the end of it because they do drop off and pick up, and they take people out for deep sea fishing and things from there. Well, we decided it would be a good idea to just ride our bicycles right off the edge of that pier, which was brilliant for about 3 seconds, because that water was about 15 feet deep there. Not a big deal for me. I was a pretty good swimmer. However, those bikes went 15 feet down. And they had to come back up because we were a long way from home. I don't tell you these stories to brag. What I'm telling you is that following my friends was almost never a good choice when they were doing crazy stuff like that. Now, I wasn't quite the type of leader that I am today. I wasn't leading my friends into a different direction. I was following my friends in the wrong direction, usually. What I found is that even though it's harder to work against the crowd, it's worth it. It's worth it when you follow Christ and go against the grain of everything else. Because in the end, we all left with this choice. It's the narrow path, which, in Jesus' words, few find. Or it's the wide path that everybody can find. It's easy to find. You might stumble onto the wide path. The second point here is the way of obedience. It's going to make us choose to play by the rules. I had a lot of trouble with this when I was younger. So you may not have noticed this or not. If you haven't noticed it, we probably haven't spent enough time together. But in my past, I would do a lot of things on purpose to work around the rules. Not necessarily breaking the rules, but going around them. You know, we'll catch the edge of the rules, if you will. If someone says, well, that can't be done, and I say, well, you say it can't be done. Inside your ideas of the way things work, it can't be done. And I see it differently. I think it could be done if we tried it a different way. And that's not always leading. Sometimes it's running a different way. It's not necessarily playing by the rules. I'd say probably in the last 10 to 12 years of my life, I've learned that we need rules. We don't just need rules. Sometimes they're mandatory. For example, speed limits. Man, do I have a problem with the speed limit. Just always I have a problem with the speed limit. Let me explain to you why. When I was 19, I had the opportunity to race a car in a straight line and go 270 miles an hour. And I thought that was quite the rush. But I felt like I could handle it. I never did it again. I did it the one time. It worked out great. No need to try that again. Later on, I had an opportunity to drive a car on a racetrack and drive almost 200 miles an hour around in a circle, oval, if you will. So when I turn onto 301 and I see that 35 mile an hour speed limit, I got a problem. Because that's a straight run, and I feel like we could do it at 60 if everybody would do it together. The problem is that many of the people in this town don't know what it is in their car that makes that clicking noise. And so they just slam on their brakes for what seems like no apparent reason to turn into Burger King. That clicking noise is the turn indicator. If you don't know what makes that noise in your car, ask somebody, because you might be part of the problem. So we need these speed limits, because 35 miles an hour, I can see you stopping for no apparent reason and avoid the accident. So the rules help us all survive. I found that traffic lights, as irritating as they are, they serve a great purpose. See, if it's red and we say, oh, well, no one's ever coming, and you just speed through it, then you might get a free trip to the emergency room. They bring a bus around and pick people up that run red lights. I don't know if you know this or not. Some of you know. They have red lights. So the rules kind of do matter, right? But they only matter when we jump outside the rules. Because I made the example of traffic for you tonight, but you can apply that in just about any arena that you would like. Even banking rules have their place. They belong there for a reason. In some cases, it keeps the bank from cheating you out of your money. Well, I won't mention the name. Never mind. I was going to give you a really good example, but I decided not to mention Wells Fargo. You know what I'm talking about? That's enough. I think many of you know what I'm talking about. You know, when the rules get twisted, somebody loses who was supposed to get a fair shake. That's the way it works. The rules of society are there to hold us in place. Not to keep us from excelling, but to keep us from excelling at the cost of someone else. And if we will allow them, the law enforcement, their job is to enforce the law, if you didn't know that. And when they do that properly, that means everybody plays on the same field. And that's helpful if you want to win. Now, the next point here is the way of obedience. It changes, or it charges us with personal responsibility. Now, this is a tough one for me. What I realized when I was putting this message together is that all of these are tough for me, that I have to actually think about them. So this charge of personal responsibility, you may miss this, but we have always had responsibilities. 10-year-olds. Let's just focus on 10-year-olds tonight. 10-year-olds have a responsibility to regularly take a shower. 10-year-old boys despise taking showers. They think if they wash the dirt off, it's going to be the worst thing ever. If you don't think that I'm telling you the truth, I would encourage you to come spend a week with us at Leap. 10-year-old boys, not the cleanest creatures in the world. They decide that they don't want to take a shower, and the parents decide that they don't want to fight with them about it, and so they don't. They just don't. See, what happens is, sooner or later, you begin to realize that people don't want to be around you if you don't shower. Now, I can speak from my household that somewhere between 10 and 12, boys decide that they need not just one shower a day, but maybe 2 or 3, depending on what we're doing. And that's okay to an extent. There's a water bill that has to be paid there. It's later on in life that we realize there's a water bill, there's a power bill, there's you got to pay somebody to come and take the trash away from your house. These things miss you as a teenager, do they not? That all of a sudden there's going to be car insurance and trash pickup and so much more. But at first, that's okay. You kind of like that. I know that when I was 19 and I was living on my own, I felt like paying the bills was the greatest thing in the world because I was living on my own. I was living my life, my way, and it was almost fun. But then something happened, and as the bills began to pile up, we began to blame other people for our responsibilities that we didn't take care of. And before long, we began to blame other people for the decisions that we had made in our life that led us to the point of being in debt, spiritually bankrupt. Pick whatever your topic is, but at some point, we realized this couldn't be our fault. Right? It couldn't possibly be my fault. Wait a minute. If I spent the money and I bought the house and I've chased that with a brand new car, and there's a point where I have no choice but to do what is now one of my favorite sayings, is that most of your problems have a single origination point. And it's that person you look at while you brush your teeth every day. It's that person in the mirror that they're the one that said, maybe we should have a new car. Maybe we should buy a big house. Maybe we shouldn't go to church. Maybe we don't need discipleship. Maybe, wait a minute, maybe we do. Maybe we have to back that up and do something different. We all come to a point in our life where we take on the debts of our lifestyle and begin to realize that we are solely responsible for what has happened. This brings me to my final point for tonight, that the way to obedience changes our eternal place of residence. See, when we decide that we want to obey what God has told us, when we want to hear His voice and be prepared and ready for what He has in store for us, then we realize that we have a chance to walk with Jesus, to hear Him. I want to believe that if I had been born at a different time, born in a different country, born at the time where I could have walked with the disciples with Jesus and listened to Him teach and watched the miracles, that I somehow would have been the best disciple ever. And then I realized I probably would have been the worst. I probably would have been the one that complained. I would have probably been the one that said, how far are we going to walk today? These sandals really hurt my feet. We without a toe, I can't wear these flip-flops. That was just for you. You're going to take a minute. Let's let that wash over. When reality sets in, I know I would have been just like the rest of them. Because I've learned that society as a whole, not one of us is better than the other. And if not for Jesus, it would fall apart. It all falls apart without Jesus. When I place my life in His hand, He's faithful to lead me exactly where I need to go. Surrender is hard. You know, the narrow way, it looks hard. But we should do it anyway. The narrow way looks long. Jesus said it is long and it is difficult. But He tells us to do it anyway. The narrow way looks like it's going to require a whole lot of discipline. And I would encourage you to do it anyway. The narrow way requires a lot of thought. But do it anyway. The question you might most naturally have with that is why? Because it's worth it in the end. Tonight, I feel like that we have to walk down this spot that maybe you've been at, maybe you haven't, that it becomes really simple. It's the ABCs of Christianity, that we should accept that Jesus is our only way to salvation. That we would believe that He is able to forgive us of our sins, and that we would confess our sins to Him. This very simple method has been paid for with blood. Christ died for one reason, that you would be able to have life with Him. Just the possibility that you might want to was enough for Him to do it. Tonight I would say that if you haven't taken the opportunity, or if you feel like you've slipped away, or you're not exactly where you think you ought to be at this amount of time with Christ, that you would take the opportunity to reset, repent. That word repent, it's a complex word. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds like. It literally means if you're going this direction, to decide to go that direction. It's not a simple, well, I'm not going to do that anymore, but I will do this still. I can control this sin, so I'll let the rest of them, I can surrender all the rest of them. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a full acceptance of what Christ has for you. Tonight, if you would be able to say that, then I would say, stand with us as the band sings, "My heart is yours."